Looking now to our agenda, there's the next point. That's the IAPB strategic framework, 2013 to 2017. And yes, we have a new strategic framework, thanks to the great involvement of many of you who helped really to shape our agenda. And I would like to invite Richard to present what is happening there and what the strategic framework looks like.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Richard Bennett, it's up there. I've been working with you over much of the last year on the development of your new strategic framework. I want to give you a brief introduction to it this afternoon. This will be brief. You've all got the strategic framework in your pack. You've all been consulted several times over the last year, so you've seen earlier versions of it, and most of you, many of you have commented on those different versions as we've gone through the process. So I know I don't need to explain it in detail to you. So I'm just going to give you a few highlights on it, and then Peter and I would take questions from you after the presentation, if that would be helpful. So first of all, just a reminder of the process, which began actually at your General Assembly, which Peter has already referred to back in September 2012. There was a series of discussions there. And the first thing I did when I was taken on as your consultant for the process was to read through those, discuss them with some of the staff, and build from there towards, first of all, a survey of all the members of IAPB. We got a very encouraging response to that, and I'll refer to some of the things you said on a later slide, which led into an executive committee discussion of the results, enabling a first draft of your strategic framework to be put together in January of this year. That went out to you for your comments and proposals and identification of gaps and grumbles about the way things were worded and so on. We got 35 responses to that consultation, which, along with a one-day staff workshop, looking at some of the detail of the strategy with the whole staff team, enabled us to produce a second draft by March, which was taken to the board meeting in April in Bangkok. We spent a substantial amount of time during that meeting identifying and discussing some of the key issues that still needed resolving at that point. There were some fairly clear trends that had come out of your responses to earlier stages of the consultation process, but there were a few areas on which some discussion was needed, and the board applied themselves very vigorously to that process and came out with some answers which enabled us to produce a third draft, which again all the members received for consultation during May, and we had 23 responses to that round of consultation. We were down to some fine details and some bits of word changes here and there by then. I think by the time you received that draft, most of you would have said, well, what I said in earlier consultation seems to have been taken up. So I wasn't, as your consultant, too concerned that the number of responses dropped at that point. I think that's a reflection of the fact that the work you'd done already was being reflected in the stages of drafts we'd reached at that stage. So that led to a final draft strategic framework that was finalized in May and taken to the executive committee. That's the document which was considered by the board this morning and formally approved, and which is in your pack today. So it's been a longish process. You've been asked many times for your views on a whole range of things, and I'm very grateful as your consultant to have had such thoughtful responses so many times from you all the way through the process. It's made it an enjoyable and productive process from my point of view. Just a little on the overall shape of the strategy. And perhaps one of the first things to say is that it's fairly careful about identifying who IAPB actually is. That may seem like a strange thing to say, but it was very noticeable in your responses to the initial survey and through some of the discussions and interviews that I did at various stages in the process, that quite often members would refer to IAPB as they and not as we. And clearly the they was meaning the staff team. So you were identifying yourselves as members, but then saying IAPB is actually over there, it's not in here. And this strategy, this strategic framework, is designed around an understanding of IAPB that says IAPB is the members operating collectively with the support of the staff. And that's specified in footnote number 1 in the strategy. You can read the exact wording there, but it took some discussion, I think, to get there. But it's fairly clear, I think, to all of us that that's where IAPB, that means you, want to be. Page 1 is the vision, mission, values, and goal. This is a bit more than motherhood and apple pie. There was some discussion of the content of this, and there's some amendment from earlier drafts. The overall big picture says, of course, you are about achieving universal access, and then the goal for this strategic period specifies that you intend to achieve significant progress towards that vision. And your values, there are 2 values written down there, and they are about, unsurprisingly for a network of members, unity with diversity, really valuing the fact that you are diverse, that you are different from each other and therefore have things to gain from working with each other. In unity, particularly when it comes to your advocacy work. There are 3 strategic aims in the strategy. Advocacy, covering the spread of national level to global level. The second strategic aim is about the knowledge, skills, and cost effectiveness of the members and what IAPB can do to enable you to be more knowledgeable, more skillful, and as cost effective as possible, and focus on the effectiveness of individual members as members of IAPB. And then the third strategic aim is about how the strategy will be resourced. Each of those strategic aims, there's a line in the strategy that says there will be a 2 to 3 year rolling priorities document to support each of those strategic aims. And that's because the external environment, of course, changes over that period of time. It's not possible to predict in advance what all the changes will be. And, of course, you need to reflect the progress you've made to date as the strategy progresses. And so you have 2 to 3 year rolling priorities to develop alongside the strategic plan. And, again, the board considered the first version of those this morning. So that work is already on its way. Just to reflect back to you some of the key priorities and issues raised by you as members during the process, and a little on how they were dealt with. So I've already mentioned the they and us, them and us use of pronouns in the network and the attempt to tackle that. The emphasis in this strategy is that it is a strategy of and by the members, and not just by the Secretariat for members. It also resulted in a decision to include in the strategy a commitment to undertaking a review of membership and governance frameworks. Johannes has just referred to that, and again, the terms of reference for that work were discussed this morning by the board, so that work will now get underway over the next 12 months. The of and by is reflected also in the strategy, particularly in terms of how advocacy will be done. Quite a lot of you responded to the survey by saying, we expect to do quite a lot of the work as members for IAPB. And there are times when we would like the leaders and the staff to do the advocacy work on our behalf. But a mix And depending on location and topic and so on, the mix might vary a little, but we do expect and hope that we as members can be active in the advocacy work of IAPB. And that's reflected in the way that the first strategic aim in particular is written. There was some debate in Bangkok about the presence in your advocacy of people with visual impairment, and as a result of that, there is a commitment in the strategy to aim to involve and enable the inclusion of people with visual impairment on the front line in your advocacy work. Advocacy on what? There was a huge diversity of contributions in answer to that question during the survey stage of the process, which got honed down somewhat as the strategy process went on. A lot of the focus here is on, as Peter emphasized in his presentation a few minutes ago, a lot of the emphasis is on national policy and resource priorities, and an emphasis on coalitions of members working together at that level. And two types of global processes, some specifically to do with your specialist topic and how that relates to NTDs, NCDs, aging, and so on, and the other to do with the big picture global processes, including the WHA action plan, again referred by to Peter already, and the post-2015 ongoing process, similarly mentioned by Peter. To me, surprising number of you referred in the survey to the importance of putting a priority on generating good quality evidence to back up your advocacy, and that was particularly evidence on the economic results of effective eye health work, and the cost effectiveness of focusing on eye health. So consolidating evidence also appears in the advocacy section of the strategy. Also in the survey in the early stages, a number of members said that IAPB, or that work should be done at sub-national level, at district level, at regional level within a country, and at local level. That was considered, but the decision in the end was to say members are quite right that work needs to be done, but IAPB is probably not the best vehicle to get it done. So that is not reflected in the strategy. It's important that you know what you said that didn't get into the strategy as well as what you said that did. And that's one key area that was not included on the basis that individual members as individual organisations will do an immense amount of work at that level, of course, but it will not be a coordinated collective effort of IAPB. Again, the survey demonstrated the range of topics on which you would value IAPB coordination of information and skills and knowledge development. There is a massive list, which I was very happy to hand over to the Secretariat, and they have access to that and are using it to help them develop the rolling priorities referred to earlier in that area of the strategy. And a lot of you wanted more interaction with each other, the ability to learn from each other's experience, to exchange knowledge and skills between yourselves, and in order to strengthen each other along the way, and to find ways of collaborating productively together. So that put an emphasis in the strategy on the convening function of IAPB and an expectation that a growing amount of that would happen online and face-to-face through IAPB's coordination. There was substantial debate both in the consultation phases and at the board meeting in Bangkok on the role of IAPB in managing grants to members. I was probably the last person in this room to learn that that was an issue for IAPB. You know that that's been a concern for some time, and there was a range of views expressed through both the survey and the consultation stages. It was discussed in Bangkok, and there is a careful definition of boundaries for that side of IAPB's possible role as a result of that reflected in the strategy. So those are some of the main priorities and issues that you raised in the process of consultation for the strategy, and I hope those of you who participated in the various consultation stages can read the strategy and say, aha, that's what I said, and see that reflected in the way that the strategy eventually turned out. Which is just a final point from me to re-emphasize that this is a strategy of and by yourselves. I've been very happy to be a secretary and scribe to your process as we've gone, but it is very much your strategy. You have inputted along the way many times, and many of you have done so. Some key issues did come out of the process. Those have been debated, I think, pretty thoroughly, and I hope resolved for the level of a strategic framework. And I hope it's now a close reflection of your own priorities for IAPB's work. And just a reminder that the of and by, there's an emphasis in there on the by, and it will only be successful if the members now move forward and implement it.